We do have 5 members here, so we are at quorum. But I'll leave it up to you if you want to get started or wait a couple minutes.
I say let's do another minute and a half and start at 4:12. See if anyone else comes in, which August just did, so thank you.
Okay.
And at that point, I'll call to order.
Great.
Okay, it's 4:12 and we have a quorum, so I'm going to call this meeting to order. For those of you who don't remember or know me, my name is Mike Wazakowski. I am the current chair of the Public Transit Advisory Committee, and I will be running this meeting. So thank you everyone for attending. Felice, could you go through the instructions for behavior in this call, as well as a roll call?
Yes. Good evening. My name is Felice Laverne, Transit Planner 2 with Lawrence Transit. With me here is Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. He will work alongside Mike Wazakowski to facilitate the meeting proceedings. Adam and myself will facilitate the Zoom portion of the meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and public access cable channel 25. During the meeting, when you are not participating, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found on the lower left-hand side of the Zoom menu next to the video icon. When you are muted, a red line will appear over the icon. Muting your microphone during the meeting will make it easier for everyone to hear. You'll just have to remember to unmute if and when you want to speak. In some cases, we may mute or unmute people as needed to minimize distractions during the meeting. Please remember to state your name and title for the benefit of those listening remotely. You can turn your video on and off by clicking on the video icon for the menu. For the purposes of the public meeting, please keep your video on when you're participating in the meeting. When you're not participating, it is okay to turn your video off. Just remember to turn your video back on when you are participating. If you're participating by phone, you can click *6 to unmute your phone. For those using Zoom, somewhere on your screen, you will see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker, gallery view tiles all the meeting participants. Now we'll turn the meeting back over to PTAC Chair Mike Wazakowski.
Thank you. Do we want to go through a roll call of attendees?
Yes. Lance Fay. Logan Stewart.
Here.
Mike Wazakowski.
Here.
Nick Kuzmiak. Alan Ackland.
Here.
Gregory Critchlow. Bill Wilson. August Rudisell.
Here.
Freddie Gipp.
Here.
I just see Nick joining right now.
Okay. Well, I see Nick has joined. Thank you very much, Nick. First order of business, is to review and approve the minutes from our February meeting. For those of you who have internet connections, the link to the minutes is on the agenda. And as with last meeting, I'll offer 3 opportunities for people to review and provide updates and friendly amendments to the minutes before we deem them approved by unanimous consent. So does everyone have an opportunity to review the minutes from last week? And does anyone have any amendments to offer to the minutes? Any amendments? Okay, hearing no further amendments. Minutes are approved by unanimous consent then. Thank you very much for your effort reviewing those. At this time, we'll proceed on to agenda item 1, which is the proposed service changes for this coming August. Adam, I believe you have some supporting documents to present to us.
Yes, this is Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. And I guess I just want to step back for a second and let you know we did not have written public comment for item B on the agenda, but I do think I see one member of the public on the Zoom call, JT Thornburg. So
I apologize for that.
That's okay. But just want to check in with Mr. Thornburg if you had any general public comment or if you wanted to speak to a particular agenda item. Okay, this is Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. We'll be available. Oh, I see a chat that Mr. Thornburg.
Just listening, okay.
So.
Thank you for attending, JT.
All right, so Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. Yes, I will bring up some information related to proposed service changes for August of this year. Okay, so that is sorry, give me a second here. All right, we're going to do it this way so I don't fumble around with figuring out the notes versus presentation mode. Okay, so our proposed route changes this year are with a couple of particular routes. So I guess I want to start out by clarifying that we have a big major route redesign study just about to start this year. This is separate from that. The major route redesign study is about system redesign, really looking at our transit system in a holistic way, in particular in coordination with the transit facility that we are moving forward with over at Bob Billings and Crestline. So what I'm going to walk through here is kind of our annual route changes that we propose. The reason why we're still doing this right before a major route redesign study is that these proposed changes would be in effect for a whole year before that major route redesign would go into effect. And looking at the system, just the way things are set up, the couple of changes we're proposing here we think will persist through even after major route redesign. So we do try to avoid whiplash where you make changes to a route one year and then turn around the next year and make changes again. But we do think the changes we'll look at today will be changes that also still make sense after major route redesign. So, looking at the first proposed route change, this is along Route 1, and I've zoomed into just the area of the route where we are proposing changes on Route 1. Provide a little context for the area of the route we're talking about. So everything south and east of 11th and Delaware is going to stay the exact same under these proposed changes. So we're really zeroing in on kind of that northwest part of the route, close to the downtown area. And what we are looking at is trying to more directly serve some of the new development that has occurred in the Warehouse Arts District. There are 2 existing apartment buildings in that area, with a third at 8th and Pennsylvania that's slated to open up this August. So we're getting a lot more density in this pocket of East Lawrence, as well as some business development. So this proposed change from downtown takes the route along 7th Street past the Santa Fe train depot and Van Gogh, up New Jersey along 8th Street, and then taking Delaware over to 11th. So there's those 3 lofts that I mentioned. Penn Street lofts will be completed this year. Already existing are the Polar lofts and the 9 Del lofts. A couple other things along this section of proposed route would be Kennedy Glass, which is a growing business right now, having more employees and more business there. Van Gogh Mobile Arts is over in that area, and the Santa Fe Depot, which I mentioned. So really looking at that as an opportunity to capture some ridership for people that are not currently close to a route. We did look at the handful of bus stops that would no longer be served by Route 1, just to check the ridership at those stops and try to understand if there's big pockets of ridership that we need to be thinking about. At a few of these stops, there are 2 people per day. At one of them, there's 4 people per day. So there is some limited ridership at stops that we would be no longer serving by Route 1. But our balance every time we propose a route change is to try to serve more people with the same amount of resources. So we are hopeful that this new routing would help us capture more riders and serve people in the area better than we do right now. So I believe I'll pause there and see if there are any initial questions or thoughts on Route 1. I guess maybe one more broad thing I'll say before I move forward is there's a current survey on Lawrence Listens right now, accepting feedback on Route 1 and Route 29, which we're about to walk through. There's information at the library about the route changes, and we have done outreach to our bus drivers that operate both of these routes to get their input and to have them start putting their ear to the ground with riders on their routes. So those are some of the ways we're trying to get feedback for these. But with that said, I'll pause again and see if there's any thoughts on Route 1 changes.
Hi, this is August, a PTAC committee member. What will the frequency still be half hour on that route?
Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. Yes. Yep, no changes to frequency.
Okay, the only 2 concerns I have are the 11th and Delaware unprotected left-hand turn, and then also the bottleneck at 10th and Delaware for Jungle House and Decade Coffee product unloading. Their semi-truck deliveries park in the middle of Delaware and basically funnel, what's the word? Funnel it down, I guess, to almost a single lane narrow. Bottleneck, there we go, thank you. And it's not frequently, but I use Delaware quite a bit, and I drive a little tiny coupe, so it can be hairy. So those are just my 2 concerns I'd like to discuss: is the unloading of product for Decade and Jungle House, and then the unprotected left-hand turn at 11th and Delaware.
So Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. I did bring up the unprotected left with drivers because I knew that was something that I wanted to get their feeling on if they thought that would be okay. You know, that is this route along Delaware and 8th, New Jersey, 7th is one of these city-defined truck routes. So it's a place where we kind of want to push larger vehicles. So the drivers I spoke with didn't feel as concerned about that unprotected left. I mean, there was recognition that at certain times of day certainly is busy. So something to think about. This particular route does have a little extra time in it. So if a driver had to sit there for a minute or a couple of minutes, the feedback from drivers is that would be something they could handle. Now the trucks parking in the street, that's an interesting one. You know, we certainly can do some direct outreach to Decade and Jungle House and just better understand what their options are for deliveries, if that's their only option, or at least understand how often that happens, or if there's any sort of regular schedule to it so that we can be aware. But yeah, if they're in the middle of the Delaware, there's no way we'd be passing. We just have to sit and wait.
Thank you.
This is Mike Wazkowski, PTAC Chair. Do any other members have questions or clarifications they'd like about this proposed change?
Yeah, Lance Fay, Vice Chair, PTAC. There's a couple of things dealing more with amenities and communicating to riders. Some of the stops that will be eliminated along 11th Street and then turning up towards 10th and Vermont. If you were to know the demographic of the riders that currently use those stops, when this route changes, you're going to want to have some really effective verbal and written communication, not an app on your phone communication. May want to see if we can get ahead of getting either signs removed or something posted on them, because you're going to have a lot of people that are just kind of used to getting on and off on those stops, and in many cases aren't going to know about this very well ahead of time. Also, let's look at where the closest stop is to New York Elementary. I know of a couple of families that take their kids to and from New York Elementary on the city bus. I see where they can get off the bus that's just a couple blocks away, but again, my concern here is a matter of communication and leaving stops and benches and amenities out without any indication that they're no longer active, and the confusion that might cause. And so if we could get ahead of that before this change occurs, I think otherwise it's probably pretty good.
Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager, and those are good points. And I guess I will clarify, and this, I don't know if this complicates things or makes them easier, but the few stops that we show us going away from on Route 1 will continue to be stops for routes 11 and 15. They will just no longer be served by Route 1. So we will, to your point, Lance, we still will need to, I agree, get ahead of that communication to let Route 1 riders know that those stops won't be ones they can get off on anymore. But we've, at those points, those bus stop signs are not coming up. They're staying there to still serve a couple of the other routes, Route 11 and 15. So we'll just have to think about how we best communicate that Route 1 is no longer going to be at those places.
Mike Wazkowski, PTAC Chair. Thank you, Lance and Adam, for that discussion. Does anyone else have any other questions or concerns about this proposed change? Okay, hearing none, let's talk about Route 29 then, Adam.
Okay, so again, for context, I'll just do this zoomed out version. of Route 29. So largely the route staying the same all the way until 23rd and Hawthorne is where we start proposing changes. So the western end of the route. So over in this area, the bus does a little bit of a figure 8 currently. So we currently take Clinton Parkway out to Inverness. We take a counterclockwise loop around Inverness, 27th, Wakarusa, back to Clinton. And then we serve currently only one direction, only in the eastbound direction along 24th Place. There's a few major apartment complexes there where a bulk of the ridership comes from on the western end of this route. And then one other oddity is that we use a frontage road for a very short travel distance. Kind of runs along Clinton Parkway before jogging back at Hawthorne. So one of the reasons we are looking to take this more in a bi-directional pattern along Clinton Parkway and 24th Place is to match existing Route 9 in the area. Having a couple of routes that serve the same area but do it in a different pattern, it's just not very convenient for passengers, and certainly new riders can, I'm sure, create some confusion. Another consideration is that we have a stop right here along this frontage road that is close to an apartment complex here, and that's where a bulk of the ridership comes from. There's just under about 50 people a day. But that stop is located at a place where there's no sidewalk. And when there's no sidewalk, it's very tough for us to get improvements. We typically don't go in and pour a concrete pad in a place if it's not going to be ADA compliant. So we're looking to ask riders from that stop to use a stop just about 100 feet up next to Clinton Parkway that is ADA compliant. We've got a bench there now. We may look at improving that to have a shelter given the amount of ridership in the area. But we think adding more bi-directional service here just creates a more straightforward route. I know some of the early returns from the survey that's out is that students mention the frustration, students who live in these apartment complexes, at when they're westbound riding back home, they have two choices. They can either get off at Clinton and Crossgate and walk a decent amount of distance to their apartment complex on 24th Place, or they can ride the bus all the way around the loop until it comes back and drops in front of their apartment complex. So this change would allow more direct service to and from some of those major generators. So I'll probably leave it at that for Route 29. That's generally what we're looking at out there.
This is Mike Wazkowski, PTAC Chair. Do any members or people in the audience have questions or concerns about this route?
Yeah, Lance Fay, Vice Chair, PTAC. I have more of a question. I know that some of the apartments that are in this area, there's some senior-based apartments, and I'm just curious if there has been any feedback or concern voiced among senior users of this route involving this.
Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. I have not seen any early feedback through the survey yet. I have not had relays from the operators related to senior living. I know.
This is Margareta DeFries from KU. Most of those apartments are down along Crossgate closer to 27th Street, and we don't actually serve those apartments that are senior living in this current proposed version of Route 29. We never have. Route 9 used to, but doesn't any longer.
Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. The other thing that jumps in my mind with Route 29 as seniors is I know there's some housing further east on the route where it's not changing, so closer to Clinton and Iowa. And I know we've got some pedestrian network challenges over there as far as some lack of sidewalk and different things that are definitely on our radar for improvement. But in this area, have not heard anything yet. Were there certain, I guess we just want to clarify, Lance, are we talking about the area a little farther south, as Margareta mentioned, Clinton?
Yeah, Lance Fay, Vice Chair, PTAC. It's kind of an overall area thing, and it's more asked as a question. I don't have a specific location in mind. I've just kind of heard, from what little I've ever ridden Route 29, I've heard a little bit about, say, seniors wanting to get to, say, the High V, where the stops are relevant to that, or where they are relevant to their apartments from that. And that's only been a couple of things, so I'm more asking a question as to if you've heard more. I know when the route was changed a couple of years ago, there was question about where bus stop service would be to that High V. And right now, as I look at, I can't picture a big problem with that right now, looking at this, but I'm less familiar with this route than some of the others, so I'm more asking a question as to if you've heard anything that I maybe haven't.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. Yeah, those are good questions to be asking. We'll definitely keep our ears open as we get feedback on this one. I guess the other general thing I would just put on all of our radars as we move into the major route redesign discussion later this year is, seniors using transit as one of those lenses we'll want to look through major route redesign with. We'll just want to keep that in mind as we think about how we serve Lawrence overall. Be important to think about. Okay, I will move on. If there's other questions, we can come back to it. So last slide here, just wanted to give an update of what we're looking at next. So as I alluded to, we did meet with bus operators of each of these routes about a month ago now to talk through our proposed recommendations, just to see if they had any insight, things we weren't thinking of, but heard pretty supportive feedback from that side of things. Our current survey that's out right now is open for another 2 weeks, so please, if you haven't taken it yourself, please do, or encourage those around you to take it before March 22nd. So later tonight, actually, we are also meeting with the East Lawrence Neighborhood Association to talk through the Route 1 change, since it will affect that part of the neighborhood. The one item I don't think I mentioned as I walked through this is there is a potential opportunity on the realigned Route 1 to incorporate some existing public art with transit. There is an installation called the Wishing Bench close to 9th and Delaware, which is pretty close to where we look at siting some new stops. And we're certainly not going to force anything on the neighborhood, but we'll open that question to them and see if there's interest in perhaps shifting that installation just a little bit to become a bus stop amenity and be kind of a functional use. Or it's possible that the neighborhood would rather it continue to be, just a reflective art installation. So we're open to that, but just saw it as a potential opportunity to kind of bring some uniqueness to the system that might be valuable. So we're bringing these proposed changes to you tonight. We will plan on bringing back final recommended changes in April. So similar to last year, and I have a linked document here, we will digest everything we heard through public comment and make any necessary edits or changes to our initial proposals. And we will package that in a document so people can understand what we initially proposed, what we heard from people, and why we did or didn't respond to concerns or tweaked recommendations from people as they commented. So we'll bring back final changes in April. There's a chance things might be different if we hear, some good arguments from the public while this is out. So that is what I had on proposed route changes, but happy to answer any other questions.
This is Mike Wazkowski, PTAC Chair. Do any members or people in the audience have final questions before we wrap up this agenda item? Hearing none, let's move on to agenda item number 2, which is the March distributions of the fare donation policy.
Okay, Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. Share again. Okay, so we did some work with this group to talk through an improved fare donation policy, a way that we provide free passes to the community and allow organizations to submit requests for those passes. As you can recall, we made a few key changes. We added to the number of passes we made available. We did more direct outreach to organizations that purchase bulk passes and that have applied for donated fares in the past. And we created a system to handle if we got more requests than available passes. So, our first deadline for requests was March 1st. We received requests from 12 organizations who submitted applications for passes. Half of those requests were for the maximum amount that we set per organization. And it did turn out, as we thought that it probably would, that the total dollar amount of requests exceeded what we had available for the March distribution period. That's probably too small. So I anonymized the organizations here, but these are the actual requested amounts and distribution amounts. So you can see the 12 organizations, varying levels of requested dollar amounts worth of passes. There was a pretty good mix of organizations that requested different fare types. So single ride passes or 10 ride punch cards or T-lift passes, that was pretty mixed. Using our calculation to stay within our amount that we could actually distribute, you can see the column on the far right is what we're proposing to actually distribute. So as an example, organization number 1 asked for $374 worth of passes, but given all the requests that came in, what we can offer to that organization is $333 worth of passes. So because our total requests were higher than what we have to offer, everybody gets a little bit less than what they asked for. And that's, I think, as we talked through that as a group a couple of months ago, that was decided as a fair way to try to do that. So I don't have a lot of content with this. I have a broad discussion question of just if there's any feedback or concerns from the way this is looking this year. This is kind of our first time trying this new amount of distributions and the way we do it. So just looking for a gut check from members if people have think this is still a good path and a good way to do things, or if have any lingering questions or concerns.
Nick Kuzmiak, PTAC member. I had a couple of thoughts on this one. So the first one is kind of just a question to remind me. We increased something from 1% to 2%, and that was the budget that creates this allocation. Could you remind me what that comes from again?
Yes. So historically, the policy had always been 1% of the prior year's fare revenue.
Okay.
We changed that to be 2% and also to be a rolling 3-year average of fare revenue so as to smooth out major peaks and valleys like we experienced with COVID.
Right. Okay. And is this particular a request and distribution cycle the only one for 2021, or is this one of 4 quarters, 2 halves? I kind of forget what the frequency was.
This is Mike Wazakowski. I think we had agreed on twice a year. Does that sound right, Adam?
Yeah, Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. So yes, we have a March 1 distribution and an August 1st distribution.
Okay, cool. Nick Kuzmiak, PTAC member. The other interesting thing I noted is that a lot of organizations did the maximum requested amount. So I guess I'm curious where the maximum requested amount came from. It appears to be 10% of the total amount that you had available. So is that just kind of an arbitrary number just to kind of test it out? And I guess, do you think there's any organizations that truly need more donations than the maximum request allows? Like Salvation Army, for example.
Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. So the 10% number came from the policy that had been in place since 2004. I mean, the intent is so that not just one organization requests them all, to set some maximum limit. Now, your question's a good one about deserving, and when we look at applications, are there arguments to be made for one cause to be more weighted than another? I think the way the policy is set up, it's to discourage staff from being, playing favorites in that way. If someone makes a good argument for the passes, we say you get your requested amount, with the caveat that we have to do this calculation to slim everybody down if we're over. We don't really currently have a mechanism to say, this request deserves everything it asks for. This other one should take a larger hit to make up for that.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if this data analysis is necessarily warranted, but I'm kind of thinking at least some of these 12 organizations have presumably applied and received donated fares before. Would it be possible to actually compare, say, organization 4, here's what they asked for in 2021, here's what they asked for in 2020. I'm assuming some of these will be 0. Some would have gotten 100% of what they asked for, which was the maximum. So I'd be curious to see kind of who the winners and losers were. If there are much smaller organizations who ended up benefiting from this new language, and if there's large organizations who are no longer able to fulfill their requests.
Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. We can certainly look at that. I can tell you, just looking at the last 3 years, which we brought that data to the group last month, pretty wild swings in just the amount of organizations that would request these and the dollar amounts that were asked for. It might be different now that we're more openly, it's almost like a call for projects, right? I mean, we're saying, it's time to apply, please apply. We might see a different pattern because of the perhaps new transparency and this availability.
Yeah.
So
and I guess it's hard to say that's good or not yet, right? It's just different. And I think it'll be really interesting as this goes on to kind of see what the response is from the nonprofits. If they think it's unfair, more fair. I mean, I suspect that somebody like Salvation Army might say, hey, this isn't really fair anymore, while a much smaller organization like the Ballard Center might say, this is, great, this is a lot better than we've had in the past. And I guess that's just policy decisions for you, right? There's always going to be winners and losers and unintended consequences. I was thinking if it might almost seem like a good idea to raise the or the maximum request amount, simply because some organizations really do have a lot more people that they serve and may require more. But I think the problem could become if you know that, every 6 months you're only going to get 70% of what you hope for, then you'll just increase the amount that you ask for by, 30-ish %, so that when you inevitably get cut 30%, you end up right where you wanted to be in the first place. So I wonder if there are going to be more savvy requesters who are going to kind of abuse that system, which is why I would hesitate to raise or remove that maximum request value. That would rely on a lot of trust that the organizations would all play fair. So I don't know. Just some thoughts there.
Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. The only other thing I want us all to keep in mind is that this calendar year, through route redesign study, major route redesign study, discussion around fare-free policy and other kind of stratifications of equitable fare policy is coming up. So,
Okay.
you know, this policy is what we have now. Depending on how this year goes, could look very different a year or two from now. So just something to think about.
That's good to keep in mind. Thanks.
Mike Wazkowski, PTAC Chair. Thank you for that conversation, Nick and Adam. Does anyone else have questions, comments, or concerns about this recommended distribution?
This is Al Ackland, PTAC member. On the usage, do we track the actual usage of the distribution to make sure that all the distributions are used?
Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. That is a tricky one. I don't know that we have a foolproof way of doing that. I mean, it relies on us assuming that the agencies that are requesting them use what they ask for. There's not, you know, with paper passes, especially with different types of fare media that they're asking for, there's not really a way to follow up and make sure that organization X, you know, actually needed 370 passes and used them all. That relies on some trust of the organizations that are applying for these.
Al Ackland, PTAC member. Thank you.
Mike Wazkowski, PTAC Chair. That does actually, in me, raise a question. Do the paper passes, the 10-hole punch cards, do any of those expire ever?
Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. So there's certain passes that that will expire. I mean, obviously think about a monthly pass where it's labeled, you know, March 2021. But a 10-ride punch card, a single ride pass will not expire.
Mike Wazakowski, PTAC Chair. If there are no further questions, since we need to recommend a distribution, I'll entertain a motion now to approve the numbers as laid out on this slide. Does anybody want to make a motion?
Kuzmiak, PTAC member, I would motion that we approve the changes that have been made to the fair donation program and try to continue them until circumstances change.
Okay, is there a second?
August Moodstyle, PTAC member, I second.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to approve the policy and the distributions as laid out. Believe that we need to do a roll call then.
Lance,
I approve, yes.
Logan,
I approve as well.
Mike,
Aye.
Nick,
Aye.
Alan,
Aye.
Gregory, Bill, August,
Aye.
Freddie.
Aye.
I heard 7 ayes and 2 non-votes. So the motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, with no further discussion needed on agenda item 2, let's go on to number 3, which is the request for qualification selection recommendation for the Multimodal Transfer Facility.
Okay, Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. PowerPoints left and right. Sorry, everybody. It's the name of the game tonight. All right. Well, I admittedly wish that this presentation was going to have a little more information to it, a little more specific information to it. It's a little bit of a tricky timing challenge for us as we have RFPs and RFQs out and try to negotiate agreements and get those before the city commission and get projects moving. I certainly want to bring things before you all, before they hit the city commission desk, especially when we're going to go spend money on RFP and RFQ proposals. But can't share as deep information while we're kind of mid-negotiations of a contract. So I'll walk through this, and certainly as you have questions or want to have gaps in information filled, please ask for them. I'll let you know if I have to be vague or if I can be more specific. But I did want to bring this to the group still and for us to be able to talk through it. So let's jump into this. So when we're talking about the Multimodal Transfer Facility Request for Qualification, so this is the RFQ that we put out in late January. We're asking for engineering and design services for the Multimodal Transfer Facility at Bob Billings and Crestline. Receiving proposals, I can talk through our process for how selection works, and we can get into what we saw in the proposals we received. So, let's see here. So just as a reminder, we're talking about the site just west of campus, Bob Billings and Crestline. That's what we're looking at for the new transfer facility that we're aiming to open in August of 2022. I mentioned that the RFQ went out in late January. It closed on February 22nd. The way we set up these RFPs and RFQs is we have objective criteria with which we score proposals. We put together usually pretty small staff teams to help make the selections. In this case, it was a mix of city staff, KU staff, and neighborhood representative to help us look at the two proposals that we received and talk through pros and cons, who we thought was more qualified to do this type of work. Goal is to select a firm by a couple weeks ago and get a contract this month. So as I mentioned, we did successfully, out of the two proposals we got, felt confident that one of the groups was more qualified, had more relevant experience, but we are still working towards specifics of that agreement and exactly what we'll see out of the scope of work. So we do hope to get that. If stars align, we can maybe get that on next week's City Commission agenda, but it is possible it will be in early April. Design will be hopefully starting in April and through this calendar year, essentially, with construction perhaps starting towards the end of this calendar year, but largely being in 2022, and looking for a facility to open mid-July. Gives us a couple weeks before our route changes would go into effect in August for us to have a finished site, do some test runs, feel comfortable using it. I will now introduce some caveats to some of the things I've talked through already. So walking through what we put in RFQ, what we said that we wanted the design and engineering firm to help us with. We have mostly been talking about our transfer facility out at Bob Billings and Crestline. And so there are some elements of that site that we certainly want the engineer and design firm to look at. The building itself, not looking for a a really large building. So we put in there to ask for about a 5,000 square foot building. If you can imagine, one of the kind of typical average size convenience stores is around 5,000 square feet. So not a huge building itself that we're looking for. You see some of the bullets of uses we're thinking about for that building. So a small conference room, with lots of bus routes connecting to this site, could be a good place to have PTAC meetings or other public meetings. So some small area to do that. Bus operator break room and restrooms. Restrooms perhaps for the public as well. Looking at a couple of flex office spaces. So there are not plans for city staff or KU staff or our First Transit contractors to have full-time offices at this site, but having a couple of desks where you can plug in a laptop and do work for 2 hours or 4 hours will probably be a useful thing. So a couple of flex spaces where we can do that. And then this is a site we're looking to coordinate our lost and found out of. So some room for that activity to happen. It might be a storage room. We've looked at some kind of locker possibilities where we can just direct people to certain lockers with codes and have them get their stuff that way. But we are looking for that type of activity to be here as well. Bus operations wise, looking at 10 bus bays to accommodate city and KU buses, as well as a couple of commuter bays, so bays that could accommodate like a 50-foot over-the-road commuter coach. It'll be a pretty good place to bring in like the K-10 connector from Johnson County. We can look and see if we can bring Greyhound to this site to more, kind of link up our regional and local services. And then if there's anything in the future that would connect between Lawrence and Topeka, this could be a good place for that exchange to happen as well. So we do want to plan on those regional connections, commuter bus bays being a part of the site. Of course, an outdoor passenger waiting area. So instead of individual bus shelters, if you can imagine a large area that's covered with a canopy and lighting and things like that. We will need a small amount of automobile parking just for staff and to accommodate people, particularly accessible spaces for people to come to meetings, things like that. We're not looking for this to be a park and ride situation or a place for students to find near to campus parking. So, but we are looking for some small amount of automobile parking. Bike parking, of course, we're looking at short and long-term bike parking. So bike racks like you see around town, but also things like bike lockers, where you'd have your bicycle stored in an enclosed space where you might feel more comfortable leaving it all day, particularly in the weather. And we list real-time bus arrival signage. So signage that would tell you, route 1 is coming in 10 minutes, that sort of thing. Now, I mentioned caveats. The piece to this project that is maybe different than how we've talked about it before and how the project's been framed before is that we know that even with major route redesign, we are still going to need some amount of transfer activity downtown. That is just the way our town is set up. It would not make a whole lot of sense to take everything that currently transfers downtown and move it all to Bob Billings and Crestline. We just need some sort of transfer activity down here to adequately serve East Lawrence, North Lawrence, 6th Street corridor. There's just places where it won't make sense to take every route to this new facility. So we did include in this RFQ a request to have engineering and design consultant help us with site selection design for improved amenities downtown for 3 to 5 bus bays. So we're looking at less, buses at one time transferring downtown, but still having some better accommodations, safer accommodations for buses, passengers to exist down here. So that portion of the project, like I said, 3 to 5 bus bays, again, an outdoor waiting area with a canopy, bicycle parking. I list a prefabricated operator restroom. So in the event that we are not close enough to the library for bus drivers to quickly run in and out and use the restroom during their layover time, we will need some operator restroom option. So they make standalone prefabricated restrooms that look nice and could accommodate that need if we were to have downtown transfers not exactly where they currently are today. So those are some of the elements we definitely asked for. We do still have an open mind about some things. So we had an optional list as well. A couple of those items were, I guess before we move on from downtown, I'll just note we are not thinking about any sort of building downtown other than the canopies and the waiting area. So we're not thinking about a staffed facility or, you know, another operator waiting room or restroom or things like that. So a little bit different than the main facility out of Bob Billings. So on the optional side of things, customer service window. In this case, we'd be talking about out at the Bob Billings and Crestline site. You know, perhaps we want indoor public waiting area, customer service, people who can help guide with information. Perhaps this is a place where we want either some general storage for city use or a tornado shelter. You know, that part of town, we need to look at our tornado shelter map, but it might make sense with people on buses and bus operators for us to have some solution for tornado safety. And then also, just from a multimodal perspective, do we want a ride-hailing or a pickup drop-off lane? So a place where shared automobiles can create a connection between transit to and from. It's a thing that other large cities have. Lots of times they're called kiss and ride lanes. You know, you kiss your partner goodbye as they take the bus and you drive to your work. So we're keeping our options open for that type of activity. I think before I jump to the next slide, I might pause and see if there's any questions or thoughts about the things that we asked for or looked for through the RFQ.
This is Mike Wazakowski, PTAC chair. I was curious, what kind of flexibility did we offer in terms of the location, both on the site for Bob Billings and Crestline, as well as downtown areas?
It's a good question. Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. So, given the 2014 and the 2018 site selection studies, as well as the MOU that we signed with KU last summer for the Bob Billings site, that main facility site is pretty locked in. We did not provide flexibility for the main transfer site, given the amount of steps it's taken to get there for that.
To clarify, I was more wondering specific, do they have flexibility between Crestline and Iowa Street on the south end of Bob Billings?
Yes, thank you for that clarification. Absolutely, we've got that. We can't go all the way to Iowa, so if I go back up to the red line that you see here, we've got that amount of flexibility from KU as far as, you know, what we might move forward with. The reality is there's some significant grade challenges on the site, so that will kind of guide where we ultimately end up. You know, as you see the trees start here, that's pretty sharply going uphill up to the lead center. So that does limit us as far as kind of what is really feasible. But yes, it is really an open slate for them to help us figure out access and where how would it best work for pedestrians and different things like that. There is flexibility there.
Thank you. And what about on the downtown spaces that you were spelling out? Obviously, we have the space that's between 7th and 8th Street on Vermont next to the public library that would be an option, but what other locations are we giving them the freedom to explore doing improvements there?
Yeah, so Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. Downtown is a little more open. There were a couple sites identified in the 2018 study. One of them you alluded to is our current site. Another was one of the Vermont Street lots, I think between 9th and 10th, kind of just south of Wheatfields. I don't know that we want to limit them to just look at those two sites. I think given how we try to coordinate with the businesses that we're currently next to, I think citing ourselves adjacent to existing businesses might be challenging. I think city-owned property, so things like parking lots, are probably a more viable place for us to look at carving some space out of for adequate facilities. Something else to think about is the downtown master plan process that's been going on, also considers city-owned parking lots as opportunities for development. So there are a lot of moving pieces downtown, and we expect that to be, site selection and then what we might do there to be a very robust discussion with a lot of pros and cons about any site. But I think that city-owned property down here is probably a more likely way for us to move forward, and find a spot where we can get just a little space for 3 to 5 bus bays.
Kuzmiak, PTAC member. I wanted to kind of explore the idea of the downtown improvements a little more. So in my experience in engineering, usually an RFP or an RFQ involves at least some sort of what you think the job is going to cost. But it sounds like with this downtown area, there's really, it's all pretty open at this point. There's really not a clear vision as to what it's going to look like. So were applicants judged more on their creativity or their past experience? How did you decide, or I guess even did you decide between the applicants based on the approach to the downtown stops?
Yeah, so Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. So a couple things. I guess the first thing I would say is that I think the clarity in what we're doing downtown is 3 to 5 bus bays, covered canopy, seating underneath that. So I think programming-wise, there is some clarity to what we're looking for. There's maybe less clarity to where right now. To the point about measuring proposals, and we'll get into this a little bit on the next slide. One of the reasons we went RFQ instead of RFP, so request for qualifications instead of for proposals, is that we did really care about experience, relevant experience, their qualifications, because we have some of these less surefire things we're doing. We're not exactly asking them to do ABC. We cared a lot about their past work with transit facilities and the different things they had done, and certainly looking for, did they have an example of them doing work in a downtown area where they had to balance how things look compared to historic properties, and how they fit into already densely developed areas. So that was, I'm hoping that's kind of getting at your question, Nick, at what we considered when we're looking at 2 proposals and not having, an exact plan in front of them and what we want them to execute.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was asking. Thank you for clarifying that.
Hey, this is August, PTAC member. And Adam, this may be premature. One of my biggest concerns when they were discussing the transfer facility was what routes would continue to go downtown. Is there any idea or any assumption, like any prognostication of what will be like 1, 6, 7, or is it just way too early to tell?
Well, we're Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. So we have set our first route redesign study steering committee meeting for the last week of this month. So, you know, we're just starting to get into what do we want our system to look like. So it is pretty early. I would say, I mean, when you look at our map, I think you've kind of zeroed in on a few routes where it is probably not going to make, we're probably going to always have a route along the corridor of 6th Street, right? It probably doesn't make a ton of sense to drag that to Bob Billings and Crestline and have that still function in a way that's practical for people moving up and down that corridor. I think you can similarly see things on how we serve the east side of town and different things. So I think you're tracking probably the way that discussion's going to go as far as what routes stay in certain areas. But it is still early and a little up in the air until we really get into route redesign study.
Lance Fay, PTAC Vice Chair. If you look at the route redesign proposals drawn by the KU grad students last year, that'll give you some pretty good insight as to what some of the possibilities are. And the concern about there still being service and connectivity in downtown from north and east and along 6th Street parts of the city has been an ongoing concern. I've been following the concern about where a transit hub will be and where the routes will be for well over a decade now, and one way or the other, that's going to be addressed. As far as exactly where and what, that's, I guess, what we get to figure out in the next few months. But that's definitely has been an ongoing concern, and fortunately, it's being addressed quite well at this point. So.
This is Mike Wazakowski, PTAC Chair. Do any other members have comments about the proposed elements here for transfer facilities? Okay, Adam, how about, can we go to slide 5 then?
Yes, so Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. So I didn't want to put in every single thing we liked and disliked about the proposals we received, but I did want to set the stage for how that group looked to make its decision. So with the first proposal, which is the proposal group that we're pursuing a contract agreement with, there was a lot of relevant work experience, a ton of work on multimodal facilities, on transit facilities, some examples using very similarly challenging sites to what we're looking at. So long, skinny sites with steep grade changes, some downtown experience. What we're calling Proposal 1 here really delivered on a lot of that type of experience. More than 120 transit projects in the last 15 years. So lots of work examples to draw from. And when I was able to reach out to reference projects and people who worked with that group before, there was good feedback on how those ended up. Another thing we were impressed by with that proposal was the way they're looking to engage with the public and with stakeholders in a way that we think will be very meaningful. You know, there's the facility project is a little interesting because we have asked people about programming quite a bit. If you look at the 2018 study, there was a lot of public engagement around what do you want to see at the transit facility. You know, of course, people bring up things like restrooms and bike parking, and you know, there's a giant list of programming things that people want to see. With this stage that we're in right now, and particularly with downtown, I think there will just need to be some very focused design and stakeholder work at the same time, talking about sites and how things look in relation to the things that they're next to. And the first proposal laid that out pretty well, we thought. Additionally, they have some coordination already with the companies that are working on our route redesign study. So we know that we want those two studies to talk to each other. You know, as we figure out what routes are going to do, that will inform what we need out of our facilities. So we saw some good synergy there. The downside, or the one thing that stood out as maybe a downside for the first proposal, was that group didn't have any past experience with Lawrence. They hadn't done projects here. So that was something we noted. And as you can see in proposal 2, that kind of favored the other proposal. They did have some Lawrence experience. What proposal number 2 had lacked was as much relevant experience with transit and with multimodal facilities. They gave us quite a few different projects that didn't have much to do with transit. And while those were interesting and good to see that they can kind of be flexible in that way, the panel that reviewed this would have liked to see more kind of direct experience with what we're trying to achieve with transit here. So I understand that is very vague, but I'm happy again to pause if there's any other questions related to decision making, how we thought through proposals as we were looking at them.
This is Mike Wazakowski, PTAC chair. Obviously, you have to be anonymous about this a little bit, but for the outfit that provided proposal 1, you noted no direct Lawrence experience. Do they have experience in other towns that look like Lawrence, like say college towns or towns that are just too big to be serviced by a single transfer facility?
So Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager, that's a good question, and yes, they did have, I don't have it as one of the positives, but it should have been up there. They did have some university experience in places that have city and university systems that work together. So there was, you know, it wasn't as if they had only worked in large metro areas or something like that. There was indication that they know what they're dealing with a town our size and a college town our size and that sort of thing.
Michael Wazkowski, and the other question I had was, I'm not familiar with what an RFQ involves in complete, so maybe this is not the right point, but was there a difference in the price point between the two proposals?
So Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. So that, so with the RFQ, we do ask for like a billing rate sheet so they can tell us how much various members of their team would charge. But the intent of an RFQ is to judge the proposals based on qualifications and not based solely on price, and then negotiate that price to, you know, what we can handle with our budget and what we think is reasonable for this project. Because we, you know, have some optional things and some things we want to look at downtown, it's much harder to do something like an RFP where they would give us a number for that whole project right now, because of the fact we have to work through some of it to really understand what it looks like in its completion. So that was one of the reasons we went with RFQ, was to not base it so much on, oh, this one's, you know, $20,000 less, so we should choose them. It's more on qualifications, and then we, you know, do our best from city side to make sure it fits what we can handle budget-wise.
Thank you. Mike Wazkowski, PTAC chair. Do any members of the audience have questions or concerns between the two proposals? Okay. Hearing none, let's go on to slide 6.
Yeah, so Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. Not a whole lot else here, but just noting that, as I mentioned, still in those contract negotiations, we will see if March 16th is feasible or if it needs to be in early April. But we hope, even if we're on an April City Commission meeting with, trying to get that contract signed, we're hoping that work can still start in April to keep us on schedule. That is all I had for content. The only other thing I would say is that I think I had framed this as asking for a recommendation for a proposal. I guess I might leave that up to the group. I'd feel more comfortable asking you for a vote if I had actual proposals to show you and you kind of felt better about that. So I'll maybe leave that up to you, Chair, and members. If I'm happy to just kind of take feedback or direction if you want us to look in different ways, as opposed to a vote on recommending something to commission, but up to you.
Lance,
This is Mike Was. Oh, go ahead, Lance. Sorry.
yeah, Lance Fay, Vice Chair, PTAC. I was going to say, since there isn't an actual proposal, and in the interest of time, as it is a little about 22 after 5, I don't know that I would feel comfortable making a recommendation yet. I'd like to know. I think I'd like to see more before going formal with it. So.
And Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager, this is where the timing gets tricky, as we're trying to, and we may not have a chance to come back to you all for a recommendation to City Commission unless we want to delay our timeline to do that. So that's the piece where we're hoping to get something negotiated and try to get rolling so we can start in April. But if the group wants to recommend before we go to commission, then we're probably looking at late April before starting, which might be a challenge timeline-wise.
This is August Rudiso, PTAC member. I just wanted to say I was very hesitant for the transit facility on Bob Billings when it first was being proposed back in 2017 or 18. And seeing this presentation today really helps me feel comfortable with where the commission and the PTAC committee are going as far as getting things molded to what our city needs. So just based on the little of information we have today, I'm excited to see where it goes.
Mike Wazikowski, PTAC Chair. Thank you for that, August. Does anyone else have any other comments, questions? Okay, hearing none. Personally, I think it's okay to keep negotiating the contract with the firm that provided proposal 1. To me, simply having worked in Lawrence is not necessarily that strong of a positive for us, other than it means that we have a pre-existing relationship with them. What I'm most concerned about is whether the outfit that we choose has the capability to design and then construct a quality facility for us, and I guess a quality second facility for the downtown area as well. So for me, I don't necessarily think we can really approve, other than just to say that I'm leaning toward proposal 1. So I don't know that there is a motion that we really need to make on this.
Okay. Well, Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager, I will certainly keep everyone updated, and I can do that just informationally through email, and of course we'll have things on our website related to this project. So make sure y'all aren't surprised by anything, but yeah, we're pretty happy with where it's going. We just trying to keep pushing through so that this year gets us far enough so that next year is successful.
Sorry, Mike Wazikowski, PTAC Chair. One final question. If it does come up for approval on the 3/16 meeting, would it be a part of the consent agenda?
Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager, that's likely where we'd put it, unless we get other direction from City Manager's office. But this is a budgeted item. It's part of a project that's known. We'd certainly, if Commission wanted to discuss it, or if City Manager's office thought we should do that, we'd be open, but we would likely start with it on consent.
Okay, thank you. The only thing I would say is if it does get pulled off a consent agenda, please advise me so that I can attend.
Absolutely, thank you.
Mike Wazkowski, PTAC Chair. That wraps up agenda item number 3. And seeing as we are at 5:30, I'm going to move that we table agenda item number 4 to the April meeting, which I know it's important. KOMA training is very important, but we're kind of out of time.
And Mike, Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager, I might suggest that that members just review this information that we have before you all, and if there are questions, please let me know. But that way we can, everyone has the information and they can review it. The only one thing I would mention related to that item is just some new guidance related to real-time Facebook commenting. So if you find yourself with 4 other PTAC members all simultaneously commenting on Facebook posts, that can be considered violation of KOMA. So just a heads up on that. That's something maybe newer that we hadn't necessarily thought about. But with that, happy to present in April, or we can just have members review it and certainly bring questions back to staff, and we can help with in that way.
Mike Wazkowski, PTAC Chair. I certainly advise everyone review the materials, and I still think it would be worthwhile to have it as an agenda item for April. Don't know what our agenda will be quite yet, but if we have more time, I think it's worth spending time during a meeting talking it out with staff, as opposed to just trusting that we're all reading everything and getting the gist.
Lance Fay, Vice Chair, PTAC. I would agree and say, well, maybe what we could do is arrange to have it as one of the first agenda items, and if everyone has reviewed it, perhaps we could kind of go through it, reasonably quickly. Kind of was the idea, maybe. But since it does need to be addressed, perhaps if we try to put it towards the top of the agenda and know that we've got other things to get to, then maybe that would work best.
Yeah, this is Freddie Gitt, PTAC member. I agree with Lance's suggestion. I think that's a good idea.
Okay, Mike Wazkowski, PTAC Chair. That's what we'll do. When Adam and Lance and I set up the agenda for April, we'll set the KOMA review as the first agenda item, and then have everything else follow from there. Okay, before we break, do any PTAC members or Adam and Felice, do you have any further notes that you'd like to provide us?
Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. One thing just real quick, staff is going to pursue the 2021 LONO grant application. So we pursued LONO last year and won 5 electric buses and associated infrastructure. Given the way we set up our current project that we're working through, we've got all the infrastructure we need to just add 1 more bus, which fits our vehicle purchasing needs. We really need to buy 1 or 2 buses a year, essentially. So we are planning on pursuing that and see if we can get 1 more electric bus coming our way that would arrive in 2023. So just a heads up that we're moving that direction.
Thank you, Adam. Mike Wazkowski, PTAC Chair. Any members have last comments? Okay, hearing none. Just as a reminder, if you do have any agenda items that you'd like us to consider for the future, you may contact Lance, myself, and Adam by email. Please be sure to only include those 3 of us, as if you include too many people, that will risk violating KOMA and triggering a meeting, and we don't want to do that. Otherwise, our next meeting will be held on April 12th, and I believe it'll be same time, same Zoom place as we've had this meeting. So thank you very much for your time and attention today, and for the lively discussion on our agenda items. Really appreciate you taking an interest in our public transit system. And with that, unless someone else has something really important, I move that we adjourn.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. See you.